Yeah, I mean, that time and place, the 70s in the Village in New York City, it was like, I call it, one brief shining moment where there really were at the time discrete and separately cohesive lesbian and gay male communities. And if you were there, you got to see it was like a living social experiment. You got to see what happens in terms of sexuality when men have no women to constrain them and when women are completely free of male influences. And the straight men envied the way these gay men were having sex, top and bottom, S&M, having sex, ejaculating at least once every day and more than once a day when possible. And each supposed sex act just take a few minutes. The men would consistently make themselves, freely available for sex to other men, no expectation or desire for affection or gentleness. And straight men wanted being with women to be like what the gay men were doing. The lesbians were the polar opposites in every way, right? Every way. And straight women, looked at this and were envious and wished that being with men was like what lesbians were doing together. So what, of course, male sexuality was going to become the standard for all sexuality because that's what men, gay or straight, want sex to be like. And I get that it became the default sexuality in heterosexual relationships because there's a man involved. And, as a lesbian, I feel, bad that heterosexual women have to tolerate this. But how did this make the jump to, maybe there's more about how it made the jump to heterosexual sex, but I don't get like how it made the jump to lesbian sex. I mean, this is how lesbians, young lesbians take for granted now aggression, role playing, and all that seeped in from male sexuality, not just gay male sexuality, but male sexuality. It breaks my heart.
In the late 1980s in California, gay male sexuality gay male sadomasochism really kicked off politically with the Folsom Street Fair and so on. So it became absolutely dominant. And some lesbians were involved with gay men in gay male sadomasochist clubs. And those lesbians, some of whom had considerable histories of abuse, like Pat Califia, for instance, who now calls herself Patrick, who has described how she was beaten every day by her father in childhood. So some lesbians adopted the practices of dominance and submission. And there was a group called Samoa in San Francisco who put out literature. This came into the UK in the early 80s and created lesbian sadomasochism. And it was very, very political, the campaign, which I've described elsewhere in my autobiography and in my book, The Lesbian Revolution. So I don't want to describe that in too much detail. But I think we were very aware at the time that for lesbians, it was very much connected with sexual abuse and violence that women had suffered, because as I've explained in many places, the masochism in women is quite general because girl children and women do not grow up in a situation of equality. They have sex thrust upon them by men, a culture that puts them down. So they're in no position to learn love and sexual relations in a position of anything other than subordination, which is likely to be eroticized in the form of masochism, not for everybody, but for many. So for lesbians, there is that background that many women, if not most, have potentially a masochistic component to their sexuality, and it's hard to get over that. But many of them also had experienced child sexual abuse.